Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm taking a second look at the Beta85X HD edition. Now, the first review that I did of this model was short because I had an ESC fire, as did many others, which caused Beta to investigate the issue. And they posted an announcement, which I will link to in the below, where they basically held their hands up and said, there's been a problem with the first batch of ESCs, and they were dealing with about 100 cases out of about 2,000 units that were sent out. And they came to the conclusion that it was a failure with the BL Halley 32 ESC, and at the same time they concluded that the system can't handle 4S, although the failure that I had was done using a 3S battery, so there was an issue to be addressed. And they have done that, and here is that model. Now, before I run through the specs, there is a slight anomaly with their findings in that my friend NJ Tech took one look at their PIDs and said, those are way too high of a value to be running on this Copter. And I agree. It's a well-known fact that high PID values can damage components if used incorrectly. And NJ did a live stream on what he discovered, and I'll link to that in the below if you are interested. But with his PIDs, he found that he could run 4S fine with the first batch and is still running 4S on the second batch without any problems. And the way that he's doing it is to run two 300 milliamp 2S lipos in series with a connector like this, which he helped me to make. So we've got three XT30 connectors, where the one that goes into the Copter has its positive connected to the positive of the receiving connector, and then its negative to the negative of the other receiving connector. You then bridge the other two terminals that are left with a wire, and I'll show you a picture of that. But again, I can't take any credit for this. This is all NJ Tech. So his whole reason for persevering with this method is explained in his live stream, but essentially it's all to combat the issue of these models being too heavy for the amount of power that they have. So if you go really light, using a 4S LiPo, along with his lowered PIDs, then the model will have enough power to not experience these yaw washout issues that people are calling them, where you will come out of a steep dive or a high velocity maneuver and the model will yaw or pitch on its own, almost like it's stalling because it's not got enough power to recover from what you are throwing at it. And he says that it works, and I believe him, and I will be trying it out, but not today. Because Beta have sent me this Tattoo 450 milliamp 3S LiPo to use with it, and they are strictly telling people not to use 4S. So the 3S LiPo weighs 40 grams, but guess what? My 2S 300 milliamp LiPos in series weigh exactly the same, and then the connector is 3 grams, so it's very close in weight, and it makes a lot of sense what NJ is saying. So this is an 85mm Cinewhoop. It's not really one for in the house unless you have got a really big space, which luckily I have access to, so you'll be seeing that later. Essentially, it's a 2-inch brushless model, so for me, its ducts are really just protectors to make it safe for flying. And of course, if you are new, then if you hit something, you will just bounce off whatever you have hit rather than messing up your props, which is why I think they only provide one set, and they are the Emax Avan brand. I also think the idea is to be lighter than the usual carbon fiber frame based 2-inch Copters, which are usually heavy without a battery. They're around about 84 to 90 grams, and this guy is 75 grams without its battery. So add on the 40 grams of the 3S LiPo onto that, which gives you an all-up weight of around 115 grams, which is very attractive and non-threatening, and I think that's the appeal with these things. Because I try to be objective as possible when looking at every product that comes my way, and when I first saw these things I thought, they're too big and too powerful and clumsy to fly in tight spaces, and not just because of the size and power either. You still have to remember that there is a higher latency than your normal FPV camera, and that does affect how quick you can react indoors in tight spaces. And then outside, they aren't quite powerful enough, and they do these strange maneuvers on their own, but people are buying them and they like them, and that's because not everybody wants to fly acro. Some people are new and they like the security of the protectors, where others just want them for their smooth HD footage and don't want to do acro. So that's the mindset that I'm putting myself in for these models. So moving on to the motors, they are Beta FPV branded 1105 6000 kV with a naked bottom, and they are held in with just 2 screws. And while I'm on the underneath, there is a high quality lipo strap and also some silicone to stop the battery from slipping. You can also see the motors plug into the ESC board via JST connectors, so they are easy to replace, and the wires are also a high quality silicone. This is the XM Plus version. It's also stored underneath, and it came flash with the RSSI on the AUX 12, which was all set up nicely in Betaflight as well. You can also get this model with pretty much any receiver you can think of, and you can get it as a plug and fly. My only complaint is that there isn't any room to mount the antennas. In fact, in my last video, people thought that I had broken the protectors because there is tape all around the back, but it's just for wrapping my antennas around because I couldn't find anywhere else to put them. It's not an ideal location because the antennas get in the way of the USB port to configure Betaflight. However, I can just move them to the side and fit my USB connector, but it is a tight squeeze. At the back, we've got an LED board which is connected to Betaflight, so you can configure them. And the ESCs are BLHeli32 running D-Shot 1200, and again I agree with NJ Tech on this one. It's a little bit overkill for a 2-inch model, and you have to ask, why didn't the benefits of 32-bit help with the ESCs going up in smoke with all of the protection settings that the 32-bit ESC brings? But they are rated to 16 amp with a 25 amp burst, and you have to remember that is per ESC as well. But mathematically, this 3S75C LiPo can only deliver about 34 amps in total, whereas if we take the 16 amp continuous capability of these ESCs and times that by 4, we get 64 amps, so there should be plenty of headroom with this battery and this model. The flight controller is hidden, but it's an F4 with an MPU 6000, so it's limited to 8K, which is fine. And it's got Betaflight on-screen display, which was set up nicely. There was just a couple of things to note. Its current meter is a virtual one, which I wouldn't normally use. And it's got air mode on an aux channel rather than being always on. And despite having smart audio and smart audio all being set up nicely in Betaflight correctly on the right port, they haven't enabled the VTX channel for the on-screen display, which when flying with others is just so valuable for me, so I've added that. I've also added my own rates, and I've used NJ's PIDs, which I'll flash up on the screen now. Again, thanks to NJ. Everybody go and subscribe to NJ. I feel like I say that in every one of my videos these days, but we help each other out a lot. But yeah, in general, the Betaflight setup was pretty nice. So there's just the VTX and camera left to talk about. So we can see the VTX coming out of the back, and it switches from 0 to 25 to 200 milliwatts and has 48 channels including race band. It's using a micro UFL connector which is covered in liquid electrical tape, as well as having a cable tie, so that should be secured down nicely. And the antenna is an AXI antenna, so we should have a nice clear FPV feed. And the VTX has a button on it, so you can change the settings through there. However, I just use smart audio through the on-screen display because it is much easier. So the camera is the Cadex Turtle V2 and it records in HD while sending its FPV feed to your goggles or whatever video receiver that you are using. There is a nice cutout in the canopy for your micro SD card, and there's also a cutout for the camera's connector, but I think that's just because it sticks out of the side. I don't think it's for maintenance purpose. Then there is a hole in the other side for your start and stop record button, which is quite hard to get to. I can only reach it with my little finger, and I have to let my fingernail grow in order to press it. Otherwise, take a screwdriver with you because it wasn't set up to auto record. Now, the only other thing you are given in the package is the controller board for the Cadex camera, but there's a slight problem. You see, the connector is coming out of the top here, and it didn't come like that. It comes tucked under the VTX so that you have to take the canopy off to get to it, which in all fairness is just 2 screws, but everything is so closely packed in there that you run the risk of accidentally yanking a couple of the solder joints off the flight controller. So I very carefully took everything out and routed the connector through the top, which is perfectly doable. So I don't know why they didn't do that in the first place, because the camera also comes set up in 16:9 mode and I'm using 4:3 goggles. So I went in there and changed that, as well as the auto record, but be aware you do lose the last few seconds of your video if you pull the battery whilst it's recording. But I don't have a problem with that, because usually the last few seconds of my video recording is of the copter being upside down or on the ground, so that's not an issue for me. Now, a lot of people have complained about this canopy because even though it looks like there is room to tilt the camera upwards, you actually can't, because the camera is quite big, so it's stuck in this lower position. Now, that's fine for me, but you do just slightly get the ducks in shot at the bottom of the screen, which you could easily edit out as it's only just a few pixels of them. However, people are 3D printing their own canopies to get a higher camera angle. By the way, if you aren't fussed about the HD version, they do a non-HD version which is a lot lighter than this one, so I would take a bet that it would also fly acro a lot better as well. Okay, so starting off with my large indoor space, which is the sports hall, I have overlaid the DVR footage taken from the Fat Sharks over the top of the HD footage so that you can see how much field of view that you lose with the 4:3 aspect ratio. And I will intermittently get rid of it so that you can see the full quality of the 1080p 60 FPS HD footage. Now again, I don't know whether this is my Fat Sharks DVR or the TrueD Diversity module, but indoors I was not getting as much breakup through the goggle screen as the DVR recorded. But I'm going to give the rapid fire module a go soon, so maybe that will sort that issue out, because it's not the best representation of what I was seeing through the goggles, because I wasn't getting any breakup at all, but it's the best that I can do for now. So for me, this is where the 85X is in its element. We have a windless environment with enough room to do some rolls and flips, as well as hit some gaps, but we don't have enough height to do those dives, which requires a lot of recovery, even though I tried a lot. So coupled with NJ's PIDs, this model could not be tricked out indoors, and even flying it pretty hard with that 450 milliamp LiPo, it got over a 5-minute flight time indoors. There was just a couple of things to note. The virtual current meter wasn't very accurate, which I expected, and sometime through the indoor flight a speck of dust landed on the sensor of the camera, and even though the Cadex is probably my favourite one of these all-in-one FPV HD camera systems, just like their FPV cameras, it's like they send them with a bunch of dust inside the casing waiting to be thrown at the sensor. Now there's only one way to get these specks of dust off the sensor, and that is with a rubber air blower. A brush or a cotton swab or even an air canister are all a big mistake and will only make the situation worse, so get yourself one of these. Trust me, this is coming from my own experience. So I took this guy outside, and to my surprise it took around about a minute before the model started to trick out, which again supports NJTech's theory, because after a minute or so the LiPo isn't as strong, so it can't provide as much power, and after a while it did start to do the yaw washout maneuvers. But just like my brief time with the first model they sent, it wasn't that bad, and it flies so well indoors on this 3-cell battery. I have to say I'm a little reluctant to risk the 4-cell, but I can well believe that the power to weight is the real issue here, and a light 4S setup would eradicate the yaw washout issue that we see with this model. Flying outdoors gave a better representation of the FPV feed I was seeing as well, and I was pretty impressed with the range with it running at just 25 milliwatt. As I mentioned, you can slightly see the ducts in shot, but importantly with this model there is no Jello indoor or outdoor. I know this is dusk here, but if you check my short-lived first review, it was done in bright sunshine, so this is a good one for getting good video, although I think this one needs the firmware updating on the codecs to get rid of those lines that they produce once uploaded to YouTube. Anyways, I best get my air blower out and sort out that blob on the camera. By the way, outside it's still got a 4.5 minute flight time, so it does well on this setup, especially for the casual flyer. Anyways, seeing as the flight time was so long, I'll leave you with some flying. I hope you found this video useful, and if you can afford to do so, I'll link to my Patreon in the description, as well as links to where to buy the model if you wish to do so. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
Made of glass, it seems you're shattering a part of me, and I can take it. My heart is so hungry.